Hi everyone, Pastor Steve here, welcoming you back to the beginning of our second half of the study this fall of the Gospel of John as we launch today into John chapter 11. You'll remember where we left off last time. Jesus had been nearly stoned by the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, and then he headed east of the Jordan where they didn't have jurisdiction, and many of the common people there believed in Jesus, and that's the final verse of chapter 10. And then in chapter 11, at some unspecified time during the 3 months between Hanukkah, which was the setting of chapter 10, and the Passover, which is the setting of chapters 12 and 13. At some point in that 3.5 months, chapter 11 occurs, and we see Jesus and his disciples return to Judea, to the village of Bethany, which was about 1 3/4 miles from the perilous city of Jerusalem. As we study John 11 this week, the first half of it, we all have a chance to deepen our own faith. And we'll look at this chapter and the deepening of our faith potentially under 3 headings. Number 1, a heartfelt expression of concern in verses 1 to 5. Secondly, a surprising expression of love in verses 6 to 16. And thirdly, an exemplary expression of faith in verses 17 to 27. So we begin with a heartfelt expression of concern, and the first 4 characters are introduced to us in the first 4 verses of this chapter, and you know this from question 1 in your binders. The first character is Lazarus, right? We know he's from Bethany, we know he's the brother of Mary and Martha, and we know he is ill for the glory of God. He is sick for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through Lazarus' condition. And we also know that he is loved by Jesus. Secondly, we have Martha from Bethany. She's the sister of Martha. We have Mary from Bethany, who's the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And she is the one who anointed Jesus with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. We'll see that detailed for us in chapter 12 next week. We also know that Mary, along with Martha, expressed heartfelt concern for her brother's illness, and that she is also, just like Lazarus, loved by Jesus. A couple of points to note here is that given that Jesus is known for working miracles and healing the sick, it makes sense that those sisters would send that heartfelt word to Jesus that Lazarus is sick, right? But notice that they make Jesus aware of the need without dictating how he should respond. They just show a humble dependence on him. Sometimes I make known the need to God and I tell him exactly what I think the Lord should be doing. They don't do that here. They just humbly depend on him as they make the need known. Secondly, in their message, Martha and Mary refer to their brother simply as the one you love, indicating Jesus had an especially close relationship with Lazarus. We're letting you know that the one you love is ill, and we're trusting you to act, is the gist of their message. Thirdly, we have Martha. She is, of course, from Bethany and the sister of Lazarus and Mary. And with Mary, she expressed heartfelt concern, again, over their brother's illness. And like the other 2, she is loved by Jesus. Jesus is the 4th main player in this story. He's the one who was anointed with ointment by Mary, who also wiped his feet with her hair. And he foretold how Lazarus' illness would not lead to death. Rather, Lazarus' illness, he says, is for God's glory. So reminiscent of chapter 9 with the man born blind, who it's not due to his sin or his parents' sin. It's that the work of God might be shown in his life. And here, the Son of God may be glorified through Lazarus' condition. Jesus loved Martha, he loved his sister Mary, and he loved Lazarus. A couple of notes here. Jesus certainly sounds a hopeful note, doesn't he? In saying that the final result of Lazarus' sickness would not be death. I mean, whatever was going to happen, and we don't know as we read it for the first time what is going to happen, whatever it is, it's going to result in God and his Son being glorified. So there's that hopeful undertone. And we are also told that Jesus loved not only Lazarus, but also Martha and Mary. I love the way that Augustine describes this family. His quip is that the one is sick, the others are sad, and all of them are beloved. Well, that takes us to our second section, which is a surprising expression of that love, right? Our natural expectation would be that out of his love, Jesus would do one of two things. Either he'd hurry to Bethany to heal Lazarus before it's too late and he dies, or perhaps he would heal Lazarus at a distance, right? He had done that already with others. If you remember at the end of chapter 4, there's that official whose son is dying, and Jesus says, I don't have to come there, just go on your way. He's going to be well. And sure enough, when the official gets there, his son's better, and they ascertain that it was the very hour that Jesus told him to go on his way that his son started getting better. Jesus could heal at a distance, but surprisingly, when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, as an expression of his love, therefore, he stayed where he was, right, on the other side of the Jordan for 2 more days. What in the world is up with that? Well, Jesus is on God's timetable, which does not always match our timetable. Are you with me? Sometimes God's timetable does not match our timetable. As the ancient Christian leader Ephraim said, unlike normal physicians, Lazarus' physician waited for his death in order to establish the victory of life over death. And we realize, don't we, that at times what appears to be a delay on God's part, not the timing we want, may be an expression of God's love. That's comforting. Then there's a further twist in the plot. After those 2 days, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. And the disciples object, Rabbi, the Jews just tried to stone you, and are you and us going there again? Really? There? I mean, a near stoning is a strong memory. Don't you remember? Well, Jesus answers, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees by the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. What does that mean? Well, I think if we connect back to John 9, verse 4, Jesus seems to suggest that, hey, it's still day, and so he and his disciples must be about God's work, whatever danger may lie ahead, even nearby Jerusalem, where he was recently, a stoning almost happened. Now, his disciples don't have to worry about what will happen to them if only they will follow Jesus, the light of the world. And then he's even more direct. Jesus tells his disciples, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Now, the disciples take this statement in a literal way rather than as a euphemism for death. Sleeping was a first-century euphemism for death, just as we use phrases like, oh, she passed, or he moved on to sort of soften the reality of death. So they reply, well, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better, and then we probably don't need to go to Bethany and get near Jerusalem. We can just hang out here. Well, John explains, the gospel writer, that Jesus had spoken of Lazarus' death, though his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. And with patience, in plain language, he tells them, Lazarus has died. How did he know Lazarus has died? At this point, he's still east of the Jordan, right? A messenger came and told him that Lazarus was ill, but he knows somehow that Lazarus has died, even though it wasn't reported to him. It's maybe like in chapter 1. You remember when he says to Nathanael, before Philip came to you, I saw you under the fig tree. And he can know things supernaturally because he is God. And for your sake, he tells the disciples, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Now, Jesus, notice, is not glad that Lazarus has died, but he is glad that his disciples will have an opportunity to deepen their faith in him. So Jesus again insists that they go to the now deceased Lazarus, even though he's in Bethany, dangerously close to Jerusalem. And for the first time in John's gospel, Thomas, called Didymus, or the twin, is mentioned. And Thomas says to the rest of the disciples, "Let's also go, that we may die with him." Thomas fully realizes the probable outcome of going to Bethany. Right? It's less than 2 miles from where Jesus had recently nearly been stoned twice. Look at chapter 8, verse 58, chapter 10, verse 31. And so Thomas is Jesus's loyal and zealous follower. He says he's ready to stay by Jesus' side, even if it means Thomas's own death. Now, of course, Thomas is most famous for his doubt, and we'll see this later in the Gospel of John, doubting Thomas. But also, let's recall that he was loyal and courageous here. As Leon Morris said, Thomas looked death in the face, and he chose death with Jesus rather than life without him. That's well said. He looked death in the face, and he chose death with Jesus rather than life without Jesus. Brings us to our final section, exemplary expression of faith. Upon his arrival in Bethany, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. And that would make sense if Lazarus had died shortly after the messengers had been sent to Jesus with the news of his sickness. We might reconstruct the chronology in this way. Again, it's a little bit of guesswork, but maybe on the first day, right, the messenger left in the morning to tell Jesus that Lazarus was sick. Lazarus perhaps died later, early afternoon, was buried that very first day. Then the second and third days, Jesus just chooses to hunker down and stay there east of the Jordan. And the fourth day, he and his disciples travel back to Bethany. So now it's been 4 days Lazarus has been in the tomb, and that's important because in their cultural context, many Jews believed that the soul remained near the body for 3 days after death in the hope of returning to it. That's not something that's taught in the Bible, but it was a common belief among Jews in the first few centuries AD. Among first century Jews, it wasn't 100% certain that a person was truly dead until after they had visited the tomb for 3 days. And that might seem weird to us, but consider that in the U.S., right, in the 19th century, safety coffins were used where they connected a cord to the body of the deceased person to an above-ground bell in case someone was buried prematurely. Sometimes in a cholera epidemic or something, they maybe buried someone who appeared dead, and every once in a blue moon, ding, ding from the coffin, I'm alive, would you come and dig me up, right? So anyway, by Lazarus' 4th day in the tomb, it would have been clear to everybody that Lazarus was truly and irrevocably dead. And which shows us, right, this is the wisdom in Jesus waiting for 2 days east of the Jordan before coming to Bethany. And since Bethany was just a little less than 2 miles away, many Jews from Jerusalem had come to Martha and Mary to console them in the loss of their beloved brother. What did that consolation look like? Well, it was customary for Jews at this time to engage in 3 days of very heavy mourning, and then 4 days of heavy mourning, and then lighter mourning for the remainder of 30 days. So on day 4 in the tomb, they're just transitioning from that very heavy mourning to what is still heavy mourning. And the first week of deep grief after a close relative's burial will be spent mourning, typically in one's house, not at a funeral home or something, and while sitting on the floor, not, laying down on a couch or in the lazy boy or something, while being visited by friends. And that's exactly what we see, right? They're sitting on the floor, visited by friends. But when Martha heard that Jesus was on his way, he was coming, she took action. She's a woman of action. She goes to meet Jesus on the outskirts of Bethany, while Mary just stays sitting at home. And upon meeting Jesus, Martha says, "Oh, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." So Martha shows great faith, doesn't she? Not only in what Jesus could have done in preventing Lazarus' death if he'd been there, but also in what could happen even now, since God would give Jesus whatever he asked. Even with Lazarus dead and in the tomb for 4 days, Martha had not lost hope for her brother because of Jesus. She shows an exemplary expression of radical faith in Jesus. Well, in response, Jesus tells Martha, your brother will rise again. There's hope, yes. And Martha answers, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Right? Daniel 12:2 says that those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. So Martha, along with many Jews of the day, firmly believed, Lazarus will rise again in that general resurrection at the last day, at the end. But Jesus means something different. He drops the bombshell of his fifth I am statement when he says to Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Not just I can provide resurrection and life. Jesus is the resurrection for believers who have died, and he is the life for believers who are still living. Jesus has authority over people's lives both now and in the future. There is neither resurrection nor eternal life outside of him, as Don Carson has said. And Jesus' promise is really for all who believe. Think about it. He makes a great promise that speaks to Lazarus' situation. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. Lazarus is going to live. And then Jesus makes a great promise that speaks to Martha's situation. Everyone who lives, as she is, and believes in me shall never die. What does that mean? She'll never die. Martha, she's going to pass away eventually. No, but believers will never experience spiritual death because the quality of life they enjoy is eternal. Death can't ultimately destroy a believer's life since, as Whitaker says, the believer is in union with him who is the life and the way and the truth. Well, next, Jesus asks Martha whether she believes in what he's just told her. To enjoy the benefits of life after death and to avoid permanent spiritual death, a person must believe what Jesus says, put their personal trust in him, which is a challenge to us. Have I believed? Have I personally trusted Jesus? Well, Martha responds, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is coming into the world. She's often criticized, isn't she, Martha, for being distracted and worried and fretful. We even talk about a Martha type, right, from the incident in Luke 10 when she was sort of bustling about, Lord, I'm doing all this work. Would you tell Mary to get over here and help me? But here, at the end of Jesus' earthly ministry, Martha is a shining example of faith. She fulfills the main reason this gospel was written. You remember John 20:31. It's written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Well, that is exactly what Martha believes, that he is the Christ, the Son of God, and therefore she has life in Jesus' name. Martha is not just fretful. Don't judge her by her worst day, perhaps, but by God's grace, Martha is faith-filled. Again, what about us? 4 possible applications for you to consider. Number 1, remember that those who are loved by Jesus, they get sick and eventually die, just like all humans living in fallen bodies in a fallen world, Romans 8. But what may look bad to us can actually be an occasion for Jesus to be glorified in surprising ways. Remember, those who are loved by Jesus do get sick and eventually die. We see that with Lazarus. I think about my mom with dementia. It's just a slow, progressive, degenerative disease. She's loved by Jesus, and yet she's sick and eventually will die. And yet there is great hope because it will be an occasion as she is resurrected eternally for God to be glorified. Secondly, trusting God and his perfect timing. Trust in God and his perfect timing. As J.C. Ryle says, when God delays in coming to help us, it is for some wise reason. So let's trust that God knows best. We trust him and his perfect timing. Thirdly, like Thomas, determined to stay loyal to Jesus, even when it seems dangerous or risky. And even when we don't know how everything is going to work out. They certainly didn't. We know the end of the story, but they're living through it. So, like Thomas, determined to stay loyal to Jesus, even when it's risky and uncertain. Fourthly and finally, like Martha, hope and trust in Jesus, who says, I am the resurrection and the life, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Hope and trust in Jesus.